The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystal shattering against the marble floor of the charity gala as I watched my husband of 12 years slide my grandmother's sapphire ring onto another woman's finger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The ring that had been passed down through 5 generations of Caldwell women. The ring that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless family tragedies. The ring Marcus had supposedly lost during our vacation in Italy 3 months ago. Isabella, darling, you're making a scene, whispered my best friend Caroline, appearing at my elbow with practiced social grace. But her voice sounded distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears as I watched the petite brunette throw her arms around my husband's neck, her left hand catching the ballroom lights as she displayed my heritage to the crowd of Manhattan's elite. The woman looked familiar, though I couldn't place her immediately. Mid-20s, elegant in that effortless way that suggested old money or excellent taste, with the kind of understated beauty that photographed well in society pages. She was exactly the type Marcus had always claimed to find boring. Who is she? I managed to whisper, my training in corporate negotiations thankfully keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Caroline's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on my arm. That's Sophia Chen. She's new to the city, works in marketing at some tech startup downtown. Marcus introduced her around earlier as a family friend. Family friend. The phrase tasted bitter as champagne and lies. I watched Marcus kiss her again, his hand possessive on the small of her back in a way that spoke of intimate familiarity. The same hand that had caressed my face this morning as he wished me luck with tonight's presentation to potential investors. The same lips that had promised to meet me here after his important business dinner. The Hartwell Foundation's annual gala was supposed to be my night. As the CEO of Caldwell Dynamics, I'd spent months courting the foundation's board members, preparing my pitch for their tech innovation grants. The presentation had gone perfectly, until this moment when my entire world tilted sideways. Mrs. Caldwell? A young server appeared beside me, professionally ignoring the broken glass at my feet. There's a phone call for you at the concierge desk. They said it was urgent. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape before my carefully constructed composure cracked entirely. As I walked across the ballroom, I felt eyes following me, the subtle, predatory interest of high society witnessing a potential scandal. In this world, personal disasters were entertainment, served alongside the canapés. The call was from my assistant, Rebecca, apologizing profusely for the interruption but needing authorization for a time-sensitive acquisition that couldn't wait until morning. As I handled the business crisis with practiced efficiency, part of my mind catalogued every detail of what I'd witnessed: the way Sophia's dress complemented the sapphire's deep blue, the careful staging of the proposal near the ballroom's grand staircase where everyone could see, the triumphant smile on Marcus's face. This wasn't a moment of passion or a spontaneous declaration of love. This was calculated, public, designed to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered in my professional and social circles. When I returned to the ballroom, they were gone. Caroline met me halfway across the dance floor, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was furious on my behalf but wouldn't show it publicly. They left through the terrace, she murmured, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward the bar. Marcus said something about wanting to celebrate privately. I ordered a glass of water, my hands surprisingly steady as I processed this information. 12 years of marriage, and Marcus had chosen to end it by proposing to his mistress with my grandmother's ring at a charity gala where half of New York's business community could witness my humiliation. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place. Not grief, that would come later. Not anger, though that simmered beneath the surface. What I felt was a cold, calculating clarity that reminded me why I'd built Caldwell Dynamics into a $100 million company by age 35. Marcus had made a tactical error. In his eagerness to wound me publicly, he'd revealed his hand too early. And he'd underestimated exactly who he was playing against. Isabella? Caroline's voice held concern. Are you all right? I took a sip of water, tasting possibility instead of betrayal. I'm going to destroy him. The words came out calm, matter of fact, as if I were discussing quarterly projections or market analysis. Caroline's eyes widened slightly, but she'd known me since Harvard Business School. She recognized the tone I used when I'd identified a competitor's weakness and was preparing to exploit it. "What do you need me to do?" she asked without hesitation. I smiled, feeling the first spark of anticipation cut through the numbness. Caroline's husband owned the largest private investigation firm on the East Coast, and her own connections in New York society were extensive. More importantly, she understood that in our world, information was the most valuable currency. "Everything you can find on Sophia Chen," I said quietly. "Where she works, where she lives, who she knows, what she wants." "And Caroline?" I met her eyes directly. "I need it by tomorrow morning." As the gala continued around us, I began to plan. Marcus thought he'd ended our marriage tonight with a grand gesture designed to break me. Instead, he'd given me exactly what I needed: motivation, a clear enemy, and most importantly, an opponent who'd revealed her position too early in the game. Sophia Chen had no idea that the woman whose marriage she'd helped destroy was about to become the most dangerous person in her professional life. And Marcus, in his arrogance, had forgotten the cardinal rule of corporate warfare: never underestimate your opposition. The ring might be on her finger now, but the game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I finished my water and straightened my shoulders, muscle memory from decades of board meetings and hostile negotiations taking over. Tomorrow, I would begin the systematic deconstruction of both their lives with the same precision I used to analyze market trends and identify profitable acquisitions. After all, revenge was just another form of business strategy. And I'd never lost a hostile takeover yet. The thought carried me through the remainder of the evening, through the congratulations on my presentation and the carefully curious questions about Marcus's absence. I smiled, deflected, and gathered information with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years navigating the treacherous waters of high-stakes business. By the time I returned to our Park Avenue penthouse, empty, as I'd expected, I'd already begun to formulate my strategy. The first step would be learning everything about Sophia Chen. The second would be determining exactly how to use that information to maximum effect. Marcus had chosen his battlefield poorly. He'd brought a personal fight into my professional domain, where I held every advantage. He'd forgotten that the woman he'd married wasn't just his wife, she was Isabella Caldwell, the CEO who'd built an empire by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. And right now, Sophia Chen looked like the most promising opportunity I'd encountered in years. The investigation file landed on my desk at exactly 7:30 a.m., delivered by Caroline's personal courier along with a steaming cup of my favorite Ethiopian blend. I'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep, my mind churning through possibilities and strategies like a computer processing data. Caroline's efficiency was legendary, but even I was impressed by the thoroughness of the overnight research. The manila folder was thick with photographs, financial records, employment history, and social media analysis. Sophia Chen's entire life, distilled into 47 pages of actionable intelligence. I opened the folder with the same methodical care I'd use for a merger document, though my pulse quickened with each revelation. Sophia Chen, 26, born in San Francisco to second-generation Chinese-American parents. Stanford MBA, graduated summa cum laude 3 years ago. Currently employed as Senior Marketing Director at Nexus Digital Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in AI-driven customer analytics. Salary, $95,000 annually. Rent on her Chelsea apartment, $4,200 monthly. Student loan debt, $127,000. The financial picture painted a familiar story: young, ambitious professional living beyond her means in Manhattan, probably supplementing her income through other arrangements. The timeline was particularly interesting. She'd moved to New York 8 months ago, the same time Marcus had started his expanded business travel schedule. But it was page 12 that made me set down my coffee cup with careful precision: Nexus Digital Solutions. I knew that company. Not personally, but professionally. They were one of 7 firms currently bidding for a lucrative contract with Caldwell Dynamics, a 3-year, $15 million deal to overhaul our customer relationship management system. My assistant Rebecca knocked and entered with her usual morning efficiency. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have the Nexus Digital presentation scheduled for this afternoon at 3. Should I confirm?" I looked up from the file, feeling the pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to align. Actually, Rebecca, I'd like to move that meeting to tomorrow. And I want you to specifically request that their senior marketing director, Sophia Chen, lead the presentation. Rebecca's pen paused over her tablet. In the 18 months she'd worked for me, I'd never made such a specific personnel request for a vendor presentation. Any particular reason, Mrs. Caldwell? Market research, I said smoothly. I've heard interesting things about their marketing approach. I want to evaluate their team leadership firsthand. After Rebecca left, I turned back to the investigation file. The photographs were particularly revealing. Sophia at various Manhattan restaurants and clubs, always impeccably dressed, often with older men who weren't Marcus. Professional networking, the captions suggested, but the body language in several photos implied more intimate arrangements. The most damaging evidence was buried on page 34, financial records showing regular deposits to Sophia's account. That didn't match her salary schedule. $5,000 here, $8,000 there, all from a shell company registered in Delaware. A shell company that, according to Caroline's thorough research, traced back to Marcus's personal investment portfolio. He'd been paying her. For 8 months, my husband had been financially supporting his mistress, using money from investments that were supposed to be funding our retirement. My intercom buzzed. Mrs. Caldwell, your 9 a.m. is here. The morning passed in a blur of budget meetings and strategic planning sessions. I functioned on autopilot, my training in corporate leadership allowing me to navigate complex negotiations while my mind processed the implications of what I'd learned. During lunch, I called Caroline. Have you read it? She asked without preamble. Every word. Caroline, the company she works for, they're bidding on a major contract with us. A pause. That's fortuitous. It's perfect, I corrected. She thinks she's landed a wealthy older man who'll take care of her financial problems. What she's actually done is put herself in direct professional conflict with the woman whose marriage she helped destroy. Isabella, you're scaring me a little. What exactly are you planning? I looked out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, thinking of Sophia Chen sitting in some glass tower nearby, probably admiring my grandmother's ring and planning her future as Mrs. Marcus Caldwell. I'm going to give her everything she wants, I said quietly. Professional success, financial security, public recognition. And then, when she's gotten comfortable, when she thinks she's won, I'm going to take it all away. And Marcus? Marcus is going to watch his golden girl fail spectacularly, and he's going to realize he traded a woman who built an empire for a girl who can't even balance her own checkbook. That afternoon, I had Rebecca reschedule 2 board meetings and cancel a conference call with our London office. I wanted to be completely focused when I reviewed Nexus Digital's proposal materials. Their preliminary submission was impressive: comprehensive market analysis, innovative implementation timeline, competitive pricing. But it was clearly a team effort, with contributions from their technical, financial, and creative departments. Sophia's marketing materials were polished but unremarkable, the kind of safe, corporate speak presentation that could have been generated by any mid-level executive. Interesting. She had the credentials and obviously the charm to land a senior position, but her actual work product was merely competent. That suggested she'd advanced through networking and personal relationships rather than exceptional performance, a pattern that was about to become very relevant. At 5:30, Rebecca appeared in my doorway with her usual end-of-day efficiency. Mrs. Caldwell, I've confirmed tomorrow's presentation with Nexus Digital. Miss Chen will be leading, as requested. Also, your husband called. He said he'd be staying at his club tonight and would see you tomorrow evening. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Marcus was probably celebrating his engagement, maybe planning how to break the news of his impending divorce. He had no idea that tomorrow evening, his new fiancée would be walking into a professional execution. One more thing, Rebecca. I want you to invite 3 additional companies to present their CRM proposals tomorrow. Schedule them for the days following Nexus Digital. Rebecca looked puzzled. We'd been working with the 7 bidding companies for months. Adding new competitors at this stage was unusual. But she simply nodded and made notes on her tablet. After she left, I opened my laptop and began researching Nexus Digital's client history, financial stability, and competitive positioning. If I was going to destroy Sophia Chen professionally, I needed to understand exactly how her company operated and where their vulnerabilities lay. What I found was even better than I'd hoped. Nexus Digital was struggling. Their two largest clients had terminated contracts in the past 6 months, their quarterly revenue was down 30%, and they'd had to lay off 15% of their workforce. The Caldwell Dynamics contract wasn't just another business opportunity for them, it was a lifeline, which meant Sophia Chen wasn't just another marketing director. She was likely one of their primary hopes for landing the deal that could save her company. I pulled up her LinkedIn profile, studying the professional headshot that showed her confident smile and designer blazer. According to her posts, she'd been vocal about her excitement over the game-changing partnership opportunities she was pursuing in New York. Her most recent update, posted just hours ago, mentioned exciting developments both personally and professionally. Poor Sophia. She had no idea that her exciting personal development had just made her professional development infinitely more complicated. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, working late again. Don't wait up. I deleted the message without responding. Then picked up my office phone and dialed Caroline's direct line. I need another favor, I said when she answered. Anything. Tomorrow afternoon, I want you to attend the Nexus Digital presentation. Bring David if possible. David was Caroline's husband, whose private investigation firm had compiled the morning's intelligence. I want witnesses to what's about to happen. Isabella, what exactly is about to happen? I closed the investigation file, feeling the satisfying weight of information and opportunity. Sophia Chen is about to learn the difference between seducing a married man and negotiating with his wife. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, Manhattan's weather matching my mood as I prepared for what I privately thought of as the opening move in a very personal chess game. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal Armani suit that projected authority without ostentation, paired with my mother's pearl earrings for luck. At 2:45 p.m., I positioned myself in Conference Room A, our most intimidating presentation space. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, while the long mahogany table could seat 20 but would today hold only 6. I'd arranged the seating deliberately. I would sit at the head of the table, with Caroline and David to my right, my CFO and head of IT to my left, and the Nexus Digital team facing us all. Rebecca announced their arrival at exactly 3 p.m. Mrs. Caldwell, the Nexus Digital team is here. Send them in. The door opened, and Sophia Chen walked into my domain. She was even more striking in person than in photographs, with the kind of polished confidence that came from years of being the smartest, most beautiful woman in most rooms. Her navy dress was perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, her smile radiating the kind of warm professionalism that made clients feel important. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, extending her hand with practiced grace. I'm Sophia Chen, Senior Marketing Director at Nexus Digital. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I shook her hand, noting the way my grandmother's sapphire caught the afternoon light. Up close, the ring looked exactly as I remembered from my childhood, the deep blue stone surrounded by small diamonds, set in platinum that had aged to a warm, lustrous patina. Miss Chen, I replied, my voice carefully neutral. I've heard very interesting things about your work. If she caught the subtle edge in my tone, she didn't show it. Instead, she smiled more broadly and gestured to her two colleagues, a nervous-looking technical director and an older man who was clearly the account executive hoping to close the deal. As they settled into their seats and began setting up their presentation materials, I observed Sophia with clinical interest. She moved with practiced efficiency, clearly comfortable in high-stakes business environments. Her engagement ring remained prominently displayed as she organized her notes, either from unconscious habit or deliberate strategy. Before we begin, I said, settling back in my chair, I'd like to know a bit more about your background, Ms. Chen. Your approach to this project seems quite personal. She looked up, a slight question in her eyes but still smiling. Personal? Your LinkedIn profile mentions exciting developments both personally and professionally. I always find it interesting when executives blur those lines. The room went very quiet. Caroline and David exchanged glances, while my CFO looked puzzled by my departure from our usual presentation protocol. Sophia's teammates clearly sensed tension but couldn't identify its source. Sophia herself maintained her composure admirably. I believe that passion for one's work naturally extends into personal fulfillment, Mrs. Caldwell. When you love what you do, it's hard to separate professional and personal success. Indeed, I murmured. And what exactly do you love about what you do, Miss Chen? She launched into a polished response about market innovation and client relationships, but I was no longer listening to her words. Instead, I was cataloging every micro-expression, every gesture, every tell that would help me understand exactly how to destroy her, because tomorrow's presentation was just the beginning. Before I was finished, Sophia Chen would learn that there were consequences to targeting the wrong woman's husband, and more importantly, she would discover that in the game she'd chosen to play, she was hopelessly outmatched. Sophia's presentation was flawless in all the wrong ways. For 45 minutes, I watched her deliver a performance that was technically competent, visually polished, and utterly forgettable. She spoke about market penetration and customer analytics with the practiced fluency of someone who'd given this same presentation dozens of times, but there was no spark of genuine innovation, no moment of insight that would distinguish Nexus Digital from their competitors. What fascinated me wasn't her professional mediocrity, it was her absolute confidence in her own success. She fielded questions with easy charm, made casual references to "when we implement this system," and twice mentioned the long-term partnership she envisioned between our companies. The woman genuinely believed she'd already won. The integration timeline is aggressive but achievable, she was saying, clicking to her final slide. We're confident that Caldwell Dynamics will see measurable ROI within the first quarter of implementation. I leaned forward slightly. Miss Chen, I notice your presentation relies heavily on case studies from previous clients. Could you walk us through how you personally managed the challenges that arose during those implementations? A micropause. Just the briefest hesitation before her smile brightened. Of course. The Morrison Industries project, for example, required significant stakeholder buy-in at the executive level. I developed a comprehensive change management strategy that addressed both technical and psychological barriers to adoption. I nodded thoughtfully, then opened the folder Rebecca had prepared for me that morning. Interesting. According to my research, the Morrison Industries project was managed by your predecessor, Jennifer Walsh, who left Nexus Digital 6 months before you arrived. Unless I'm mistaken about the timeline? The silence in the room was deafening. Sophia's teammates exchanged worried glances while her composure flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Caldwell. I should have been clearer. I studied that project extensively during my onboarding process and worked closely with the implementation team during the knowledge transfer phase. I apologize for the confusion. It was a reasonable recovery, but we both knew she'd been caught in an embellishment. More importantly, everyone else in the room had witnessed it. I made a note in my portfolio, keeping my expression neutral. Of course, I said mildly. These details can be confusing when you're managing multiple accounts. Tell me, how many major implementations have you personally overseen from start to finish? Another pause, longer this time. Her account executive colleague shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to intervene but unsure how. I've been involved in 7 implementations over the past 18 months, Sophia said carefully. The scope of my involvement varied depending on client needs and project complexity. Involved how, specifically? Caroline asked, her tone conversational but sharp. As project lead, consultant, or support staff? I had to admire Caroline's timing. She'd identified the moment when additional pressure would be most effective, pressing the advantage without making it obvious that this was coordinated. Sophia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. My role evolved with each project. At Nexus Digital, we believe in collaborative leadership rather than rigid hierarchical structures. Corporate speak for, I was rarely in charge of anything important, but delivered with enough confidence that a less experienced executive might have accepted it. Unfortunately for Sophia, she was dealing with women who'd spent decades reading between the lines of business presentations. Fascinating approach, I said, closing my portfolio with finality. Miss Chen, could you give us a few minutes to discuss your presentation privately? Rebecca will show you to the reception area. As the Nexus Digital team filed out, I noticed Sophia's subtle attempt to catch my eye, probably hoping to gauge my reaction. I gave her nothing, the same politely neutral expression I'd maintained throughout the meeting. The moment the door closed, my CFO Janet spoke first. That was uncomfortable to watch. She's clearly not qualified to lead a project of this magnitude. The technical components are solid, added Tom from IT. But if she's going to be our primary point of contact, I have serious concerns about project management and communication. David leaned back in his chair, his investigator's instincts clearly engaged. She's charming and well-prepared, but there's something performative about her confidence. Like she's playing a role rather than drawing from actual experience. Caroline said nothing, but her knowing look told me she understood exactly what I was doing. The presentation had served its purpose, not to evaluate Nexus Digital's capabilities, but to establish Sophia's professional vulnerabilities in front of witnesses. Their proposal has merit, I said carefully, but I want to see presentations from the other bidders before making any decisions. Rebecca, please schedule the remaining companies for next week. After my team dispersed, Caroline lingered behind. That was masterful, she said quietly. You made her reveal her inexperience without appearing to attack her. She did that herself, I replied. I just created the conditions for her to be honest about her qualifications. Caroline studied my face. There's more, isn't there? This isn't just about embarrassing her in a business meeting. I walked to the window, looking down at the street where Sophia and her colleagues were probably regrouping in a coffee shop, analyzing what had gone wrong. She's good at reading rooms and managing personalities, but she's terrible at handling unexpected pressure. That's useful information. For what? For understanding how she'll react when the real pressure begins. That evening, I worked late. At the office, partly to avoid going home to an empty penthouse and partly to research the other companies bidding for our CRM contract. If I was going to use Sophia's professional life as a battlefield, I needed to understand all the variables. Around 8 p.m., Rebecca knocked on my door. Mrs. Caldwell, there's a Sophia Chin here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Interesting. Most professionals would have called or emailed to request a follow-up meeting. Coming in person, unannounced, suggested either desperation or overconfidence. Send her in. Sophia entered my office alone, having clearly left her colleagues behind. She'd changed from her presentation outfit into jeans and a cashmere sweater, a calculated attempt to appear more approachable and less corporate. The engagement ring remained prominently displayed. Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for seeing me. I know this is irregular, but I wanted to address this afternoon's presentation directly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Please, sit. What's on your mind, Miss Chen? She settled into the chair with practiced grace, crossing her legs and leaning slightly forward, classic body language for establishing rapport and trust. I feel like I didn't represent myself or my company effectively today. Your questions caught me off guard, and I want to be completely transparent about my experience and qualifications. I appreciate transparency, I said neutrally. What would you like to clarify? You were right to call out the Morrison Industries reference. I shouldn't have presented that case study as my own work, even indirectly. It was a mistake born from enthusiasm rather than any intent to mislead. A partial confession designed to seem like complete honesty. She was acknowledging the most obvious error while hoping I wouldn't probe deeper into her actual track record. And your other implementations? I asked. She took a barely perceptible breath. I've been primarily in supporting roles, working under senior project managers while building my experience. But Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to know that despite my relatively short tenure in implementation leadership, I'm absolutely committed to the success of this project. Nexus Digital is staking our reputation on it. Finally, some genuine honesty. She was admitting that she lacked experience while trying to frame it as dedication rather than incompetence. Miss Chen, may I ask you a personal question? Her eyes sharpened slightly, but she nodded. Of course. You're clearly intelligent and ambitious. Why are you working at a company that's struggling financially when someone with your credentials could land a position at a more stable firm? It was a trap, elegantly laid. Any honest answer would reveal either her limited options in the job market or her personal reasons for staying in New York, both of which related to Marcus. She smiled, but I caught the slight tension around her eyes. I believe in Nexus Digital's potential. Sometimes the most rewarding opportunities come from building something rather than joining an established success. Even when that building process requires significant personal sacrifice. The best investments often do. Interesting choice of words. Investments. As if her career were a financial calculation rather than a professional calling. Miss Chen, I'm going to be direct with you. Your presentation today raised questions about your readiness to manage a project of this scope and complexity. Nexus Digital's proposal has technical merit, but implementation success depends heavily on project leadership. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Mrs. Caldwell, I understand your concerns, and they're valid. But I want you to know that this project means everything to me, personally and professionally. I've invested everything I have in making it succeed. Everything she had. Including my husband and my grandmother's ring. That's admirable dedication, I said carefully. But passion isn't always enough. This project requires someone who can handle complex stakeholder relationships, manage unexpected challenges, and maintain professional composure under pressure. I can do that, she said quickly. Mrs. Caldwell, I know I'm young and I know my resume might not look as impressive as some of your other options, but I'm willing to put in whatever work is necessary. This opportunity could change everything for me. The desperation was starting to show through her polished exterior. She needed this contract not just for her company, but for her personal financial security. Without it, her expensive lifestyle would become unsustainable, and Marcus might start questioning whether she was the sound investment he thought he was making. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I appreciate you coming by, Ms. Chen. Your honesty tonight means more than you might realize. She rose as well, extending her hand. Thank you for giving me the chance to clarify things. I hope you'll consider Nexus Digital for this partnership. As we shook hands, I found myself studying my grandmother's ring on her finger. Up close, I could see the tiny inscription inside the band, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The irony was almost too perfect. Miss Chen, that's a beautiful ring. Family heirloom? Her smile brightened, genuine for the first time all evening. Actually, it's new. My fiancé proposed just yesterday. It belonged to his grandmother. His grandmother. Not even the courtesy of acknowledging whose family legacy she was wearing. How romantic, I said smoothly. He must care about you very much to share something so precious. He does, she said, her voice soft with what seemed like real emotion. Marcus is incredibly generous. He's been so supportive of my career, and he understands how important this project is to me. Marcus. She'd given me his name without my asking. Probably unable to resist the opportunity to share her happiness with someone she saw as a potential professional mentor. Well, I said, walking her to the door, I hope everything works out for you, Miss Chen. In business and in love. After she left, I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. It was time to research the other companies bidding for our contract in much greater detail. If I was going to crush Nexus Digital's hopes, I needed to ensure that one of their competitors could actually deliver superior results. After all, my primary responsibility was still to Caldwell Dynamics and our shareholders. But there was no reason why sound business decisions couldn't also serve the interests of personal justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, out late with clients again. Big opportunity developing. I deleted the message and continued working. He had no idea that his big opportunity had just spent an hour in my office, revealing exactly how to destroy her professionally while maintaining perfect plausible deniability. By midnight, I had identified 2 companies whose proposals were genuinely superior to Nexus Digital's offering. Both had more experienced project teams, stronger implementation track records, and more competitive pricing. Choosing either one would be a defensible business decision that would have the added benefit of devastating Sophia's career prospects, but as I finally prepared to leave the office, I realized that simply awarding the contract to a competitor wouldn't be enough. Sophia needed to understand exactly why she'd lost, and Marcus needed to watch his golden girl fail spectacularly in front of everyone who mattered, which meant the real game was just beginning. Tomorrow, I would start making phone calls to colleagues at other major corporations, asking casual questions about their experiences with various CRM vendors. Word would spread through professional networks that Caldwell Dynamics was taking an unusually thorough approach to vendor selection, and other companies considering similar projects would pay attention to our final choice. When Sophia Chen's professional reputation crumbled, it would happen in the most public way possible, and Marcus, who thought he'd traded up from a wife to a trophy, would discover that his young fiancée was about to become unemployable in her chosen field. The thought carried me home through the empty Manhattan streets, where I fell asleep planning the next phase of a campaign that would teach them both the true cost of underestimating Isabella Caldwell. The call came at 6:47 a.m., interrupting my morning review of the remaining CRM vendor proposals. Caroline's voice was tight with urgency. Isabella, you need to see today's Times business section, page 3. And then you need to call me back immediately. I hung up and pulled up the digital edition on my tablet, my coffee growing cold as I scrolled to the article that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my situation. Nexus Digital Solutions acquired by European tech giant, $340 million deal transforms struggling startup. The headline hit me like a physical blow. I read the article twice, then a third time, each pass revealing new details that made less sense. According to the Times, Nexus Digital had been secretly negotiating with Steinberg Technologies, a Munich-based software conglomerate, for the past 6 months. The acquisition, finalized yesterday evening, would infuse the struggling company with immediate capital while providing Steinberg with a foothold in the American market. The article quoted Nexus Digital CEO praising the deal as transformative for our growth trajectory and our ability to serve enterprise clients. But it was the final paragraph that made my hands shake. The acquisition was reportedly facilitated by Steinberg's New York investment advisor, Marcus Caldwell, whose connections to the American tech sector proved instrumental in identifying and evaluating the target company. Mr. Caldwell, a partner at Meridian Capital Management, will reportedly receive a substantial finder's fee for his role in orchestrating the deal. My phone rang. Caroline. Did you read it? She asked without preamble. I read it, I managed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Caroline, this changes everything. It changes everything or it explains everything. I stood up abruptly, pacing to my office window. Below, Manhattan was waking up to another day of business as usual, while my understanding of the past year crumbled around me. Think about it, Isabella, Caroline continued. The timeline. Marcus's increased travel schedule 8 months ago. Sophia moving to New York at exactly the same time. His sudden interest in expanding business opportunities in Europe. You think they've been working together from the beginning, I said slowly. I think Marcus identified Nexus Digital as an acquisition target, used Sophia to get inside information about their operations and client relationships, and positioned himself as the dealmaker when Steinberg came looking for American tech companies to buy. I closed my eyes, remembering dozens of conversations over the past months. Marcus asking casual questions about Caldwell Dynamics vendor selection process. His sudden expertise in customer relationship management software. His interest in our budget allocations for technology upgrades. He wasn't just having an affair, I whispered. He was using her to gather intelligence about our industry. And using his access to your business network to identify other potential deals. Isabella, how many tech companies have you and Marcus socialized with over the past year? How many CEOs has he met at your dinner parties and charity events? Too many. I thought of the guest lists for our recent entertaining, software executives, startup founders, venture capitalists. All potential targets or facilitators for someone looking to broker acquisition deals. But the ring, I said, grasping at the one element that still felt personal rather than calculated. My grandmother's ring. That has to be real emotion, not just business strategy. Caroline's silence was telling. What aren't you telling me? I demanded. David did some additional research last night after your office meeting with Sophia. Isabella, that ring, it's not your grandmother's ring. The world tilted sideways. What do you mean? The original was sold 3 years ago. Marcus used Worthington Auctions, very discreet, specializes in estate jewelry. David found the transaction records. Your grandmother's ring sold to a private collector for $47,000. I sat down hard in my chair. Then what is Sophia wearing? A very good replica. Probably cost Marcus $5,000 to have made, maybe less. Same design, similar stones, but not the original. The betrayal was so layered, so complete, that I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Not only had Marcus stolen and sold my family heirloom, but he'd had a fake made to propose to his accomplice with, probably thinking I'd never get close enough to notice the difference. "There's more," Caroline said gently. "The shell company that's been making payments to Sophia? It's not connected to Marcus's personal investments. It's registered to Steinberg Technologies. They've been paying her a consulting fee for 8 months. She's been working for them all along as their inside source on American tech companies, with particular focus on software firms in the small to medium enterprise space. Companies exactly like the ones you and Marcus have connections to." I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen, seeing a woman who'd spent weeks planning elaborate revenge against people who were 3 steps ahead of her. "Caroline, I've been playing checkers while they were playing chess." "Not anymore. You're not. Now you know the real game." After ending the call, I sat in my office for 20 minutes, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and shadow while I reconstructed the past year through this new lens. Marcus's business trips to evaluate European investment opportunities. His sudden interest in my work and the tech companies we worked with. His casual questions about our vendor selection processes and budget cycles. Even his increased social ambition, pushing for us to host more industry events, meet more startup founders, expand our professional network. He hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been systematically mining my business relationships for information to sell to foreign investors, and Sophia hadn't just been his mistress. She'd been his partner in corporate espionage, using her position at Nexus Digital to provide insider information about American tech companies while gathering intelligence from industry events and professional networks. The acquisition announcement made perfect sense now. Steinberg hadn't just randomly decided to buy a struggling New York marketing firm. They'd been fed detailed information about Nexus Digital's operations, client relationships, and growth potential by someone with inside access, Sophia. Meanwhile, Marcus had used his connections in American business circles to position himself as the ideal facilitator for the deal. My intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Caldwell, your 9 a.m. is here early. The team from Quantum Systems?" I looked at my calendar, seeing the next vendor presentation scheduled 3 days ago. I'd viewed these meetings as opportunities to find alternatives to Nexus Digital. Now I realized they might be something else entirely. "Rebecca, I need you to do something for me. Cancel the Quantum Systems meeting and reschedule it for next week. Then I want you to pull our visitor logs for the past 6 months. Anyone who's come to see me about potential partnerships, vendor relationships, or consulting opportunities." "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell. Any particular reason?" "Market research," I said, using the same phrase I'd given her before. But this time, I was researching a very different kind of market. An hour later, Rebecca returned with a thick printout of visitor records. As I scanned the names and companies, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. 17 different companies had sent representatives to meet with me over the past 6 months. Software firms, consulting groups, marketing agencies, all in the small to medium enterprise space. All potential acquisition targets for a company like Steinberg Technologies, and in 8 of those meetings, Marcus had, coincidentally, stopped by my office, ostensibly to take me to lunch or remind me about dinner plans. Each time, he'd been introduced to my visitors, exchanged business cards, and made casual conversation about their companies and growth plans. I pulled up my phone and called Caroline back. "I need David to research 17 companies," I said, reading her the names from the visitor log. "I want to know if any of them have been approached by European investors in the past 6 months, and I want to know if Marcus Caldwell's name appears in any acquisition discussions." "Isabella, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking my husband has been using my office as a shopping mall for foreign investors, and I've been unknowingly facilitating corporate espionage for months." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and research. By noon, the picture was devastatingly clear. 5 of the 17 companies on my list had been acquired by European firms in the past 4 months. 3 more were currently in acquisition discussions. In every case, the deals had been facilitated by American investment advisors with extensive networks in the target industries. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd turned my business relationships into a catalog for foreign buyers, using my reputation and connections to identify and evaluate American companies for acquisition. The Nexus Digital contract suddenly made perfect sense too. If Sophia's company won the deal, they'd have inside access to Caldwell Dynamics operations, client relationships, and strategic planning. Information that would be invaluable to any company looking to compete in our market or acquire us as part of a larger consolidation strategy. I was still processing the implications when my assistant knocked. "Mrs. Caldwell, there's a Marcus Caldwell here to see you. He says it's urgent." Perfect timing. Marcus had probably seen the morning's acquisition announcement and was coming to gauge my reaction, maybe even to start preparing me for his own exciting news about the deal he'd facilitated. "Send him in, Rebecca." "And Rebecca?" "I don't want to be disturbed for the next hour, regardless of who calls or what meetings are scheduled." Marcus entered my office with the confident stride of a man who thought he held all the cards. He was dressed in his most expensive suit, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the self-satisfied expression of someone preparing to share good news. "Isabella, darling," he said, setting the champagne on my desk. "I have the most incredible news to share with you." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I'd been married to for 12 years. The man who'd been systematically betraying me on multiple levels while I'd been planning petty revenge against his supposed mistress. "I'm sure you do, Marcus. Please, sit down and tell me everything." He settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair Sophia had occupied less than 24 hours ago, and launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed presentation. "You remember Sophia Chen, from that tech company that's been courting our business? Well, it turns out her firm just got acquired by a major European conglomerate, and I played a small role in facilitating the deal. The finder's fee alone will cover our mortgage for the next 2 years." "How wonderful," I said evenly. "And how exactly did you come to play a role in this acquisition?" His smile widened, the expression of a man who thought he was finally getting recognition for his brilliance. "It's all about networking, Isabella. You know how I've been expanding my European connections over the past year? Well, one of my new contacts at Steinberg Technologies was looking for American tech companies to acquire, and I was able to make some strategic introductions." "Including Nexus Digital?" "Exactly. I'd met their team through various industry events. You know how these things work. I recognized their potential even when their current numbers didn't look impressive. Sometimes you have to see beyond the immediate financials to the underlying value proposition." Industry events. My industry events. Meetings in my office. Introductions. Facilitated by my reputation and relationships. "Marcus," I said carefully, "how many of these introductions have you made over the past year?" He leaned forward, his excitement palpable. "Isabella, this is just the beginning. I've identified at least a dozen other companies that would be perfect acquisition targets. With my connections in the American market and the growing interest from European investors, we could be looking at a completely new revenue stream." "We." As if I were his partner in corporate espionage rather than his unwitting source of intelligence. "That sounds incredibly lucrative," I said. "Tell me, in all these deals you've been facilitating, have you been careful to avoid any conflicts of interest? I mean, given my position at Caldwell Dynamics and our relationships with these companies." His expression flickered, just for a moment, before the confident smile reasserted itself. "Of course, darling. I would never do anything that might compromise your business relationships. This is all completely above board." "I'm sure it is," I said, standing up and walking to the window. Behind me, I could hear Marcus opening the champagne, probably preparing to toast his success. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the morning documenting his activities, copying financial records, and building a case that would destroy not just his marriage, but his entire professional future. The game had changed completely. But for the first time since discovering my grandmother's ring on another woman's finger, I felt like I was finally playing to win. "Marcus," I said, turning back to face him, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your new business ventures. In fact, I think we should discuss them with some other people who might be very interested in your European connections." The champagne cork popped at exactly the moment his expression began to change from confidence to confusion to the first glimmer of fear, because Marcus was about to learn that the wife he'd been betraying wasn't just personally vindictive. She was professionally lethal. The champagne glass slipped from Marcus's hand, crystal exploding against the marble floor in a spray of golden liquid and glittering shards. For the first time in our 12-year marriage, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Isabella, what are you talking about? His voice carried the careful modulation of someone trying to project calm while their world collapsed. What other people? I walked to my desk and pressed the intercom button. Rebecca, please. Ask our guests to come in now. Marcus spun around as the office door opened. Caroline entered first, followed by David, then two men Marcus didn't recognize, FBI Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the Economic Crimes Unit. Behind them came a woman in an expensive suit, who introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Martinez. Mr. Caldwell, Agent Morrison said, his voice professionally neutral, we'd like to ask you some questions about your recent business activities involving foreign investors. The color drained from Marcus's face as he looked from the federal agents to me, understanding finally dawning in his expression. Isabella, what have you done? What I should have done months ago, I replied, settling behind my desk with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally identified the correct problem to solve. I reported suspected violations of the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act to the appropriate authorities. FIRMA. The 2018 legislation that expanded government oversight of foreign investments in American companies, particularly in the technology sector. Violations carried substantial criminal penalties, including up to 20 years in federal prison. You contacted the FBI? Marcus's voice cracked on the last word. Actually, said Agent Chen, consulting his notes, Mrs. Caldwell contacted the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States this morning with detailed documentation of potential FIRMA violations. We're here as part of their preliminary investigation. I pulled out a thick folder from my desk drawer, the evidence I'd compiled over the past 6 hours with Caroline and David's help. Financial records showing payments from Steinberg Technologies to shell companies controlled by Marcus. Email communications between Marcus and Sophia discussing market intelligence and target evaluation. Meeting logs showing how he'd used my office to identify potential acquisition targets. Mr. Caldwell, Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez said, "You're not under arrest at this time, but I need to inform you that you're the subject of an ongoing federal investigation into potential violations of foreign investment disclosure requirements and industrial espionage laws." Marcus sank into the chair across from my desk, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Isabella, surely we can discuss this privately. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said coldly, was mine. I thought you were having a simple affair. I had no idea you were systematically betraying American business interests to foreign investors. Agent Morrison opened his tablet and pulled up what appeared to be surveillance photos. Mr. Caldwell, can you explain these images of you meeting with Steinberg Technologies representatives at various locations over the past 8 months? The photos were damning, Marcus in hotel lobbies, restaurants, and coffee shops with men I now recognized as European business executives. In several images, he was handing over documents or tablets, clearly sharing information. Those were legitimate business meetings, Marcus protested weakly. Meetings you failed to disclose to CFIUS as required by law, Agent Chen added. When foreign entities are evaluating American technology companies for acquisition, all intermediaries must be registered and their activities documented. I watched my husband realize that his sophisticated international business dealings were, in the eyes of federal law, potential crimes against national security. The man who'd mocked my small-minded focus on domestic business had inadvertently positioned himself as a foreign agent. There's more, I said, pulling out additional documentation. David's investigation revealed that Marcus sold my grandmother's sapphire ring 3 years ago and used the proceeds to establish the shell company that's been receiving payments from Steinberg. Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez looked up from her notes. That could constitute money laundering, depending on how the funds were used. They were used to pay Sophia Chen for industrial intelligence gathering, Caroline interjected, handing over additional files. She's been attending industry events, professional conferences, and networking functions specifically to identify American companies that might be vulnerable to foreign acquisition. The federal agents exchanged glances. Agent Morrison spoke. Carefully, Mrs. Caldwell, has your husband ever asked you about Caldwell Dynamics proprietary information, client lists, or strategic planning documents? The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought back over months of casual conversations, Marcus's seemingly innocent questions about our vendor relationships, his interest in our expansion plans, his suggestions about which industry events we should attend. Yes, I whispered, the full scope of the betrayal finally becoming clear. He's been gathering intelligence about my company too. Isabella, that's not, Marcus started. Shut up, I cut him off, my voice carrying the authority of a CEO who'd just realized she'd been harboring a corporate spy in her own home. Marcus, show them your phone. What? Your phone. Show them the texts between you and Sophia about market opportunities and target evaluation. Agent Chen held out his hand. Mr. Caldwell, we'll need to examine your electronic devices as part of this investigation. I want a lawyer, Marcus said finally, the words every guilty person eventually speaks. That's your right, Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez replied. But I should inform you that cooperation at this stage could significantly impact potential sentencing recommendations. As the federal agents continued their preliminary questioning, I found myself studying Marcus with clinical detachment. This man had shared my bed for 12 years, attended family funerals and birthday celebrations, comforted me through my father's death and celebrated my business successes. I'd trusted him with my emotional vulnerabilities, my strategic concerns, and my most intimate fears, and all the while, he'd been cataloging everything I told him to sell to foreign investors. The personal betrayal was devastating enough. But the professional implications were staggering. How many of my business decisions had been influenced by Marcus's suggestions? How many strategic opportunities had I missed because I'd unknowingly disclosed them to competitors through my husband? My intercom buzzed. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophia Chen is here. She says she has an urgent matter to discuss regarding yesterday's presentation. The federal agents looked at each other, then at me. Agent Morrison nodded slightly. Send her in, Rebecca. Sophia entered my office with her usual confident stride, but stopped short when she saw the crowded room. Her eyes moved from Marcus to the federal agents to the scattered documents on my desk, and I watched her expression shift from confusion to alarm to barely controlled panic. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. I can come back later. Actually, Ms. Chen, Agent Chen said, your timing is perfect. We have some questions for you as well. Sophia's hand moved instinctively to her engagement ring, my grandmother's fake engagement ring, as she processed the implications of federal agents knowing her name. Questions about what? Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez consulted her notes. Your consulting arrangement with Steinberg Technologies and your role in identifying American technology companies for foreign acquisition. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia looked at Marcus, who was staring at his hands, then back at the federal agents. For the first time since I'd met her, she appeared genuinely rattled. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she said carefully. The same misunderstanding your fiancé claims, I said, standing up behind my desk. Sophia, did you really think you could conduct industrial espionage operations and no one would notice? Industrial espionage? Her voice rose an octave. Mrs. Caldwell, I work in marketing. I attend industry events and network with professionals. That's not espionage, that's business development. Agent Morrison pulled out his tablet again. Ms. Chen, can you explain these financial records showing regular payments from Steinberg Technologies to your personal accounts over the past 8 months? Those were consulting fees for market research services. Market research that involved gathering proprietary information about American companies without their knowledge or consent, Agent Chen added. Sophia's composure finally cracked. Marcus told me it was legal. He said everything we were doing was standard business practice. Marcus looked up sharply. Sophia, don't say anything else without a lawyer present. But Sophia was past the point of strategic thinking. The woman who'd been so polished and controlled in professional settings was now facing federal criminal charges, and her inexperience with actual crisis management was showing. Marcus, you said your contacts at Steinberg just wanted general market intelligence. You never mentioned disclosure requirements or government oversight. Ms. Chen, Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez interrupted gently, anything you say right now could be used against you in potential criminal proceedings. You might want to consider legal representation before we continue this conversation. The room fell silent as the weight of federal criminal liability settled over both Marcus and Sophia. They'd gone from celebrating a successful business deal to facing potential decades in federal prison in the span of a single morning. I looked at them both, my husband and his accomplice, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. They'd been so focused on short-term profits and personal advancement that they'd completely missed the larger legal and national security implications of their activities. There's one more thing, I said quietly, opening the final folder on my desk. Marcus, I've also provided the FBI with documentation of every American company you helped foreign investors acquire over the past 2 years. The Bureau's preliminary analysis suggests potential violations in at least 12 separate transactions. Marcus's head dropped into his hands. Sophia swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. 12 companies, Agent Morrison repeated, making notes. That's significantly more extensive than our initial assessment suggested. I walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline while federal agents continued their questioning. Behind me, somewhere in those glass towers, were American companies that might still be independent if my husband hadn't sold their secrets to foreign buyers. Employees who might still have their jobs if their firms hadn't been acquired and restructured by international conglomerates. The personal betrayal had been painful. But the professional treachery, the systematic undermining of American business interests for personal profit, was unforgivable. When I turned back to the room, Marcus was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before: genuine remorse, mixed with desperate calculation. Isabella, if there's any way we can resolve this privately, Mr. Caldwell, Agent Chen interrupted, you're now officially under arrest for suspected violations of the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act and related federal statutes. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda warning continued, I realized that the emotional climax of this entire ordeal wasn't anger or vindication or even relief. It was grief for the marriage I'd thought I had, the man I'd thought I'd married, and the 12 years of my life I'd spent building a partnership with someone who'd been systematically betraying everything I'd worked to create. But beneath the grief was something harder and more durable: the absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice, because sometimes protecting what you've built requires destroying what you thought you loved. 3 months later, the federal courthouse steps were slick with October rain as I emerged from Marcus's sentencing hearing, pulling my coat tighter against the Manhattan wind. Behind me, the heavy doors closed on a chapter of my life that had dominated headlines for months: tech executive's husband sentenced in foreign investment scheme, industrial espionage case rocks Manhattan business community, CEO testifies against husband in federal trial. 15 years. Marcus had received 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. Sophia had negotiated a plea deal for 7 years in exchange for her cooperation with the FBI's ongoing investigation into Steinberg Technologies' American acquisitions. The fake engagement ring had been entered into evidence and would remain in federal custody indefinitely. Mrs. Caldwell, called a familiar voice. I turned to see Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez approaching with her usual professional composure. How are you holding up? Better than expected, I replied, and was surprised to realize it was true. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of depositions, testimony, and media scrutiny, but emerging from it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. The investigation is ongoing, Martinez continued, lowering her voice. We've identified at least 20 American companies that were compromised through similar schemes. Your willingness to come forward may have prevented significant additional damage to national security interests. I nodded, thinking of the other CEOs and executives who'd contacted me after the story broke, people who'd realized they too had been targeted by similar operations. The FBI had established a dedicated task force to investigate foreign corporate espionage, with my case serving as the template for identifying other victims. There's something else, Martinez added. The original ring, your grandmother's ring. We recovered it from the private collector who purchased it. The court has authorized its return to you as soon as the appeals process concludes. The appeals process. Marcus's lawyers were still fighting his conviction, though privately, they'd admitted their case was hopeless. The evidence had been overwhelming, the paper trail undeniable. Still, he wouldn't accept responsibility for what he'd done, maintaining in interviews that he'd been a victim of prosecutorial overreach and his wife's vindictive nature. "Thank you," I told Martinez. "But honestly, I'm not sure I want it back." She looked surprised. "It's your family heirloom." "It was," I corrected. "But it's also a reminder of how completely I misjudged someone I trusted. Some memories are better left buried." As Martinez disappeared into the courthouse crowd, I walked toward the black car where Caroline waited. She'd been my anchor through the entire ordeal, managing media inquiries, coordinating with legal teams, and keeping Caldwell dynamics running when I was consumed with testimony and depositions. "How is it?" she asked as I settled into the passenger seat. "Surreal. 3 months ago, I was planning petty revenge against his mistress. Today, I watched federal marshals lead him away in shackles." Caroline pulled into Manhattan traffic, navigating toward my office with practiced ease. "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. The media attention had been brutal. Business publications had dissected every aspect of my marriage and corporate decisions. Social media had been filled with theories about what I'd known and when I'd known it. 3 board members had initially called for my resignation before the evidence made clear I'd been a victim rather than a co-conspirator. "None," I said finally. "Marcus made his choices. I just refused to be complicit in covering them up." The aftermath had transformed both my personal and professional life in unexpected ways. Caldwell Dynamics had become a case study in corporate security and foreign investment awareness. We'd been approached by the Department of Homeland Security to develop protocols for identifying industrial espionage attempts. Our stock price had actually risen as investors recognized our commitment to protecting proprietary information. More importantly, the experience had forced me to examine every aspect of how I'd been running the company. New security protocols, enhanced background checks for all employees, mandatory reporting requirements for any contacts with foreign investors. We'd transformed from a successful tech firm into a fortress of corporate security. The board meeting went well, Caroline reported as we approached the office. Unanimous approval for the expansion into cybersecurity consulting. Jennifer's team is excited about the new direction. Jennifer, the programmer Marcus had helped drive away 2 years ago, was now heading our new security division, developing software to help other companies identify potential espionage threats. Her first client was the FBI task force investigating foreign investment schemes. "And the other matter?" I asked. Caroline smiled. Nexus Digital's new owners terminated Sophia's employment contract the day she was sentenced. Their entire American operation is being restructured. Half their staff has been laid off. I felt no satisfaction in Sophia's professional destruction. That seemed petty now, given everything that had happened. But there was justice in seeing that actions had consequences, that betraying your country's business interests came with a price beyond prison time. At the office, Rebecca greeted me with her usual efficiency. "Mrs. Caldwell," the Times reporter, called about the follow-up article. "And you have 17 interview requests from business schools wanting to discuss the case study implications." I'd become an unlikely expert on corporate espionage, invited to speak at conferences and consulted by other executives worried about their own security vulnerabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus's betrayal had inadvertently made me one of the most sought-after voices on protecting American business interests. "Schedule the business school interviews for next month," I told Rebecca, "and confirm the Senate committee testimony for next week." The Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs had invited me to testify about strengthening foreign investment oversight. My recommendations would likely become part of new legislation expanding CFIUS authority and increasing penalties for violations. In my office, I reviewed the day's correspondence, including a letter that had arrived that morning. The envelope bore the seal of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and inside was a handwritten note from Marcus. "Isabella, I know you'll probably never read this, but I needed to try to explain. I never meant for things to go as far as they did. What started as simple business networking became something I couldn't control. The money was so easy, and Sophia was so convincing about the legality of everything we were doing. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I know I betrayed not just our marriage but everything you worked to build. I wake up every morning in this place knowing that I destroyed the best thing in my life for money and the attention of a woman who was just using me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that losing you has been a worse punishment than anything the federal system could devise. I hope you find happiness with someone who deserves you. Marcus. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not to save it, but to think about whether I wanted to respond. The man who'd written those words sounded genuinely remorseful, but remorse didn't undo 15 years of systematic betrayal. My intercom buzzed. Mrs. Caldwell, your 4 p.m. appointment is here. I looked at my calendar, seeing the meeting I'd scheduled with Thomas Wright, the cybersecurity consultant we were considering for our new division. What I hadn't expected was for him to be so interesting. Thomas was brilliant, MIT PhD in computer science, former NSA analyst, current professor at Columbia who consulted for Fortune 500 companies on protecting intellectual property. He was also divorced, raising 2 teenage daughters alone, and possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from expertise rather than ego. We'd been working together for 6 weeks, developing security protocols and training programs. Somewhere along the way, our professional collaboration had evolved into something more personal. Nothing inappropriate, just coffee meetings that ran longer than necessary, conversations that drifted from business to personal topics, the kind of connection I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Thomas, I said as he entered my office, noting the way his presence seemed to brighten the room. How did the FBI consultation go? Productive, he replied, settling into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where Marcus and Sophia had both sat during their confrontations. But Thomas's presence transformed the space, erasing the negative associations through simple authenticity. They want to expand the task force, he continued. Your case has opened doors to investigating corporate espionage operations we never would have discovered otherwise. Apparently, the Steinberg scheme was just one of several similar operations. We spent an hour reviewing security protocols and discussing implementation strategies, but I found myself studying Thomas as much as listening to his recommendations. Here was a man who dedicated his career to protecting American interests, who understood the balance between business innovation and national security, who saw corporate responsibility as a patriotic duty rather than a burden. Isabella, he said as our meeting concluded, would you like to have dinner tonight? There's a new restaurant I've been wanting to try, and I'd love to continue our conversation outside the office. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that for the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal, I was considering the possibility of trusting someone new. Not with my business secrets or my strategic plans, but with something much more precious, the hope that not everyone who showed interest in my success was secretly planning to exploit it. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I stood once more at my window overlooking Manhattan. The city sparkled in the gathering dusk, full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. Below, millions of people were navigating their own complicated lives, making choices that would define their futures. I thought about Marcus, sitting in his federal prison cell, probably wondering how his sophisticated business scheme had led to such complete destruction. I thought about Sophia, whose ambition and willingness to compromise her integrity had cost her everything she'd worked to achieve. I thought about the 20 American companies that had been compromised by similar schemes, and the executives who were just now learning they'd been betrayed by people they'd trusted, but mostly, I thought about the future. About the security consulting division we were building, the legislation I'd helped craft, the other executives I'd trained to recognize and resist foreign espionage attempts. About the possibility of building something meaningful with someone who shared my values rather than exploiting them. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, looking forward to tonight. I made reservations at that place we discussed. I smiled, gathering my things and preparing to leave the office where I'd confronted the worst betrayal of my life and somehow emerged stronger than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More testimony, more security protocols to develop, more executives to educate about protecting their companies and their country, but tonight, I was going to have dinner with a man who understood that some things were more important than money. That loyalty was more valuable than opportunity. And that protecting what we'd built together was worth more than selling it to the highest bidder. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed the conference room where Sophia had given her disastrous presentation 3 months ago. The space had been renovated since then, transformed into a secure briefing room where we conducted classified consultations for government clients. Even the physical space had been redeemed, its history of deception replaced by a commitment to transparency and security. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, leaving behind the office where I'd learned the true cost of misplaced trust and discovered the even greater value of making the right choices when they mattered most. Marcus had thought he was trading up when he chose money and a younger woman over marriage and integrity. Instead, he'd traded everything that mattered for nothing that lasted. I, on the other hand, had traded a false sense of security for real knowledge, a comfortable illusion for difficult truth, and a marriage built on deception for the possibility of a future built on mutual respect and shared values. As the elevator carried me toward the street level, toward dinner with Thomas, toward whatever came next, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, sometimes it's building something better than they ever imagined possible, and refusing to let their betrayal define your future. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the Manhattan evening, ready to discover what came after surviving the worst thing I'd ever experienced and learning I was stronger than I'd ever known. Behind me, the building that housed Caldwell Dynamics rose into the night sky, its lights a testament to resilience, renewal, and the power of choosing integrity over revenge. And ahead of me waited possibilities I was finally ready to explore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.